What happens when the most dangerous man in New York is silenced by a single missing word? Dante Valenti had the guns, the money, and the power. But in a room full of Russian enemies, he was blind. He needed a voice. He didn't expect to find it in a soaking wet delivery woman holding a bag of lukewarm Thai food. This isn't just a love story. It's a war for survival, where the wrong translation could mean a bullet to the head. Buckle up, because Sienna Brooks is about to teach the underworld a lesson in communication. This is the silent contract. Rain battered the floor-to-ceiling glass of the penthouse overlooking Manhattan, blurring the city lights into streaks of violent neon. Inside, the air was drier, colder, and smelled faintly of gun oil and expensive scotch. Dante Valenti stood with his back to the room, staring at his reflection in the glass. He was 32, built like a prize fighter, forced into a bespoke suit, with eyes that usually missed nothing. Tonight, however, he was flying blind. "Tell him if he does not sign, we take the docks," Dante said, his voice a low rumble. Beside him, the chair where his translator, Paolo, usually sat, was empty. Paolo was currently cooling in a morgue drawer in Queens, the victim of a random mugging 3 hours ago. A mugging that felt surgically precise. In Paolo's place stood Renzo, Dante's second-in-command. Renzo was loyal, lethal with a knife, and completely incompetent at diplomacy. Renzo looked at the three men sitting on the white leather sofa opposite them. They were the Bratva, Russian heavyweights led by Nikolai Volkov. Nikolai was a mountain of a man with silver teeth and scars that mapped a history of violence. He was smiling, but it was the kind of smile a shark gives before it breaches the water. Renzo cleared his throat. Mr. Volkov. Boss says, sign, or we take the water place." Dante closed his eyes, briefly. The water place. He was going to lose a $15 million shipping lane because his lieutenant spoke like a toddler. Nikolai Volkov leaned forward, rattling off a stream of aggressive Russian. His tone was mocking, sharp, and riddled with slang. He laughed, and his two henchmen joined in. "What did he say?" Dante asked, turning around. Renzo looked panicked. He said he's happy to see you, and something about your mother? Dante's hand drifted toward the Glock, tucked into his waistband. The tension in the room snapped tight as a piano wire. They weren't negotiating. They were stalling. Dante knew it. Nikolai knew he knew it. But without the language, Dante couldn't prove the disrespect, and moving without proof would start a war the Valenti family wasn't ready for tonight. The intercom on the wall buzzed, a harsh, grating sound that made everyone flinch. Renzo tapped his earpiece. "Yeah?" He listened, his brow furrowing. "Boss, it's the food, the Thai place. You ordered pad see ew?" "I ordered it 3 hours ago," Dante snapped. "Send them away. The guard downstairs is new. He already sent her up to the private elevator. She's outside the door." Dante pinched the bridge of his nose. "Get the food. Get her out. If Nikolai sees we're eating noodles while discussing territory, he'll think we're weak." Renzo moved to the heavy oak double doors and cracked one open. Standing there was a woman who looked like she had just swum across the Hudson. Sienna Brooks was dripping wet. Her helmet was tucked under one arm. Her oversized yellow delivery jacket was smeared with city grime, and she held a brown paper bag that was slowly disintegrating from the rain. She was petite, maybe 5'4", with dark hair plastered to her forehead and eyes that were wide with shock. She wasn't looking at Renzo. She was looking past him, straight into the living room, directly at Nikolai Volkov. "Delivery," Sienna said, her voice trembling slightly. "Sorry. The elevator. It just opened and—" "Give it here," Renzo grunted, reaching for the bag. Inside the room, Nikolai Volkov spoke again. He didn't think the girl could hear. Or perhaps he didn't care. He spoke in Russian, loud and clear to his men. "Look at the Americans, eating takeout while we plant the bomb under the table. 10 minutes, brothers, then we leave them to burn." Sienna froze. Her hand tightened on the paper bag, ripping the wet corner. Renzo tugged at the bag. "Let go, kid." Sienna didn't let go. Her gaze shifted, locking on to Dante. He was staring at her, analyzing the sudden terror in her posture. He saw the way her knuckles turned white. He saw the way she stopped breathing. She knew something. "Wait," Dante said. The single word cut through the room. He walked past Renzo, stepping into the hallway. He towered over the delivery girl. Up close, he saw she was older than he first thought. Mid-20s, tired, with dark circles under eyes that held a fierce intelligence behind the fear. "You understood him," Dante said softly. It wasn't a question. Sienna swallowed hard. She looked at the elevator, calculating the distance. Too far. The men on the couch were armed. The man in front of her was dangerous. But the man on the couch had just said, "Bomb." She stammered. "What did he say?" Dante's voice dropped, dangerous and compelling. "Tell me, and you'll walk out of here with 10 grand in your pocket. Lie to me, and you don't walk out at all." Sienna looked at Nikolai, who was now watching her with suspicion. She looked back at Dante. This was it. The moment her life went from delivering cold noodles to something entirely different. "He said," Sienna whispered, her voice gaining strength as she switched to perfect, unaccented English. "He said, look at the Americans, eating takeout while we plant the bomb under the table. 10 minutes, brothers. Then we leave them to burn." The silence that followed was absolute. Dante didn't flinch. He didn't look at the table. He just stared at Sienna, assessing the truth in her eyes. He saw the tremor in her hands, but her voice had been steady. "Renzo," Dante said calmly, never breaking eye contact with Sienna. "Check under the coffee table carefully." Nikolai stood up abruptly. "Valenti, this interruption is—" "Sit down, Nikolai," Dante said. Renzo knelt. He ran a hand under the low marble table. He froze. Slowly he withdrew his hand and looked up at Dante, his face pale. He held up a single finger, signaling confirmed. Dante finally smiled. It was a terrifying expression, devoid of any warmth. "Sienna, is it?" Dante asked, reading the name tag on her jacket. "Yes," she breathed. "Sienna, tell Mr. Volkov that if he touches the detonator, my sniper on the roof across the street will put a bullet through his left eye before his thumb moves." Sienna's eyes widened. "I can't translate," Dante roared, the command echoing off the walls. Sienna flinched, then turned to the Russian warlord. She took a breath, channeling the authority of the man beside her. She spoke in flawless Russian, her cadence matching the harsh, guttural rhythm of the Bratva dialect. "Mr. Valenti says if you twitch, you die. The sniper is watching your left eye." Nikolai's arrogant grin vanished. He looked from the girl to Dante, shock registering for the first time. He hadn't expected the delivery girl to speak the dialect of the Moscow underground. "Who is this?" Nikolai asked in English, his accent thick. Dante stepped forward, placing a possessive hand on Sienna's rain-soaked shoulder. He pulled her from the hallway into the room, positioning her slightly behind him, shielding her. "This," Dante said, buttoning his suit jacket, "this is my new translator, and she's very expensive." The next 10 minutes were a blur of adrenaline and muffled violence. Sienna stood pressed against the cold wall of the penthouse, clutching her helmet like a shield. Dante Valenti moved with a terrifying efficiency. Once the bomb was disarmed, Renzo, it turned out, knew more about explosives than diplomacy. The negotiation shifted. It wasn't a negotiation anymore. It was an execution of power. Dante didn't kill them. That was the surprise. He used Sienna. "Tell him," Dante said, pacing in front of Nikolai, who was now handcuffed to the radiator, "that I know about the shipment in Newark. Tell him I know about his daughter's tuition at unseen Swiss boarding schools. And tell him that if he ever steps foot in my city again, I won't send a soldier. I'll send the IRS." Sienna translated. She didn't just repeat words. She conveyed the menace. She found herself slipping into the persona she had abandoned years ago. She wasn't Sienna the delivery driver, the dropout, the failure. She was Sienna the prodigy, The girl who learned languages faster than other children learned to walk. When she spoke Russian, she adopted the cold, formal tone of a bureaucrat sentencing a man to the gulag. Nikolai paled. The threat of financial ruin and exposure scared him more than death. By the time the Russians were dragged out by Dante's security team, Sienna's knees were shaking so hard she had to slide down the wall to a crouch. The room fell silent again. The rain still lashed against the glass. Dante turned to her. He looked different now. The predator was fed. The danger passed. He looked curious. He walked over to a wet bar and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He walked to her, extending one. "Drink," he ordered. "I don't drink on the job." Sienna squeaked. "You don't have a job anymore," Dante said. "Not the one you came here with, anyway." Sienna took the glass. Her hands shook, making the ice clink. She took a sip. It burned, hot and smoky, settling her nerves. "Who are you?" Dante asked. He sat on the coffee table, the same one that had hidden a bomb minutes ago, bringing himself to her eye level. "Just a delivery driver." She deflected. "Liar," Dante said. "Delivery drivers don't speak Moscow street dialects. They don't know the syntax of a threat. You didn't just translate words, Sienna. You translated intent. Where did you learn that?" Sienna looked down at her boots. They were muddy, staining his pristine white rug. "My father. He was a diplomat. We moved a lot. Moscow, Berlin, Tokyo, Rome. I picked things up." "Picked things up?" Dante repeated, amused. "You speak Italian?" "Try me," she replied in perfect lyrical Tuscan Italian. Dante's eyebrows shot up. "French?" "Fluently." She switched effortlessly. "Mandarin?" "Only when I'm angry," she said in Chinese. Dante stared at her for a long moment. He saw the fraying cuffs of her jacket, the exhaustion in her face, the desperation of someone working a gig economy job in a thunderstorm. "How much do you make a week delivering noodles?" he asked. "On a good week, 600. If the tips are good." "I'll pay you 5,000 a week," Dante said. Sienna choked on her scotch. "Excuse me? 5,000. Cash, plus room and board." Dante stood up and gestured around the penthouse. "Not here. I have a secure estate in the Hamptons and a townhouse in the Upper East Side. You'll be safe." "Safe from what?" Sienna stood up, finding her footing. "I'm not joining the Mafia, Mr. Valenti. I saw what just happened. That man. He wanted to blow you up. I'm not getting involved in that." "You are involved," Dante said, his voice dropping to that low, dangerous register again. "Nikolai saw your face. He heard your voice. Do you think he's going to let a loose end like you walk away? You humiliated him. You're the reason his plan failed." Sienna felt the blood drain from her face. "So what? I'm a target now?" "You're a liability," Dante corrected. "To him, you're a target. To me, you're an asset." "My last translator is dead, Sienna. I have meetings with the Triads on Tuesday, the Calabrians on Thursday, and a French cartel on Saturday. I can't trust anyone in my organization because they're soldiers, not scholars. I need you." "I can't," she whispered. "I have a life. I have—" She trailed off. She didn't have a life. She had a cat named Miso and a pile of student loan debt she couldn't pay because she had been blacklisted from academia for a crime she didn't commit. "You have nothing," Dante said, ruthlessly accurate. "I can see it in your shoes. You're drowning, Sienna. Let me be the life raft." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a burner phone. He tossed it to her. "Go home, pack a bag, say goodbye to your cat. I'll have someone pick the animal up and bring it to the safe house. A car will be at your apartment in 2 hours." "I didn't say yes," Sienna protested, though weak. Dante walked to the window, looking out at the city he ruled. "You saved my life tonight, Sienna. I owe you, and a Valenti always pays his debts. But if you walk out that door and try to go back to delivering Thai food, Nikolai's men will find you before your next shift starts. It's not a job offer to Soro. It's protective custody with a paycheck." He turned back, his dark eyes locking onto hers. So what's it going to be? The bike or the Benz? Sienna looked at the rain pelting the window. She looked at the muddy footprints she'd left on the carpet. She thought about her freezing apartment in the Bronx and the eviction notice on the table. She took a deep breath. "I need an advance," she said, "and I'm keeping the tips." Dante Valenti smiled, and for the first time it actually reached his eyes. Done. The transition from poverty to luxury was violent. 2 hours later, Sienna was sitting in the back of a bulletproof SUV with tinted windows. Her bike was abandoned. Her old life was packed into 2 duffel bags. Miso the cat was currently hissing at a baffled hitman named Kale in the front seat. "Does the cat have to come?" Kale grumbled, adjusting the rearview mirror. He was huge, bald, and had a tattoo of a spiderweb on his neck. "Miso goes where I go," Sienna said, crossing her arms. She was wearing dry clothes now, jeans and a sweater, but she still felt cold. They arrived at the townhouse on the Upper East Side. It was a fortress disguised as a mansion. Cameras tracked their movement, the door reinforced with steel. Inside, Dante was waiting in a library that smelled of old paper and cigars. He had changed into a fresh suit, charcoal gray. "Welcome home," he said, not looking up from a dossier he was reading. "It's not home," Sienna corrected, placing Miso's carrier on a velvet armchair. "It's a cage with high thread count sheets." Dante looked up, sharp tongue. "Good, you'll need it for tomorrow." "What's tomorrow?" "The Triads," Dante said. "Specifically the Red Lotus Group. They run the ports in Jersey. We have a dispute over imports." "Drugs?" Sienna asked, her voice flat. "Electronics?" Dante lied smoothly. "And luxury cars. But the language barrier is tricky. Their leader, Master Chen, speaks in proverbs. Renzo thinks he's talking about gardening. Last time we almost started a war because Renzo thought planting seeds meant burying bodies." Sienna sighed, rubbing her temples. "So I'm just here to translate metaphors." "You're here to read the room." Dante stood and walked toward her. The air in the room shifted. He was intensely masculine, overwhelming in a way that made Sienna's breath hitch. "Words are easy, Sienna. Google Translate can do words. I need you to tell me when they're lying. I need you to tell me when they're afraid." He stopped inches from her. He reached out and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His fingers were rough, warm. "And I need you to stay close to me," he murmured. "Because until we figure out who sold out Paolo, I don't know who to trust. Except, strangely, the girl who delivered my dinner." Sienna looked up at him. "Why trust me? I could be a plant." "You're too messy to be a plant," Dante chuckled, "and you were terrified. Fear is the only honest emotion left in this city." The next morning, Sienna was thrown into the deep end. They met the Red Lotus at a dim sum restaurant in Chinatown. The entire place had been cleared out. Master Chen was an elderly man with kind eyes and a cane that concealed a blade. Dante sat stiffly. Sienna sat to his right, wearing a black dress Dante had had delivered to her room at 6 a.m. It fit perfectly. Too perfectly. Master Chen poured tea. He spoke in Cantonese, his voice soft. "The wind howls, but the mountain does not bow. However, if the mountain is too rigid, it cracks." Renzo, standing behind Dante, whispered, "He's talking about the weather again. Tell him it's sunny outside." Sienna kicked Renzo under the table. She turned to Dante. "He's saying you're being too stubborn." She translated quietly. "He says if you don't compromise, you're going to break." "It's a warning, Dante. He thinks your organization is fragile right now." Dante nodded, his face impassive. "Tell him the mountain doesn't crack if it's made of iron. Tell him I respect the wind, but I control the shelter." Sienna turned to Master Chen. She switched to Cantonese, softening her tone to match the elder's respectability, but keeping the steel of Dante's message. "Mr. Valenti says that iron endures the storm. He offers you shelter from the wind, but only if the wind blows in the right direction." Master Chen's eyes twinkled. He looked at Sienna, impressed. A clever bird, Chen said. Does she sing, or does she only repeat? Sienna didn't wait for Dante. She replied instantly. The bird sings its own song, Master Chen. But today she sings for the mountain. Chen laughed, a dry, rasping sound. He slammed his hand on the table. Good, I like her. Valenti, your last man, was a fool. This one has spirit. We deal. The tension evaporated. Plates of dumplings were brought out. The deal was struck. Shipping lanes were shared. Profits split. No bullets fired. In the car ride back, Dante was euphoric. The adrenaline of the win was palpable. He sat closer to Sienna than necessary. You were incredible, he said. The way you handled Chen. I've been trying to get him to agree to those terms for 6 months. He just wanted to be heard, Sienna said, looking out the window. He felt disrespected by Renzo's confusion. You gave him dignity by understanding him. No, Dante corrected. You gave him dignity. He reached over and took her hand. His thumb brushed over her knuckles. It was an intimate gesture, shocking in its tenderness. Thank you, Sienna. For a moment, in the quiet of the armored car, Sienna forgot he was a criminal warlord. She just saw a man who was relieved not to be at war. But the peace didn't last. As the car turned the corner towards the safe house, a black van slammed into the side of their SUV. Glass shattered. Metal screamed. The world spun upside down. Sienna screamed as the car rolled. She felt Dante's arm wrap around her, pulling her into his chest, shielding her with his body as the vehicle skidded on its roof, sparks showering the street like fireworks. When the motion stopped, there was only silence, ringing ears, and the smell of gasoline. Sienna? Dante's voice was ragged, close to her ear. Are you okay? I think so, she gasped. Stay down, he commanded. He kicked the crumpled door open. Outside, gunfire erupted. They found us, Dante growled, pulling a gun from his holster. Renzo is unconscious. It's just me. He looked at her, blood trickling down his forehead. Can you shoot? He asked. I speak 5 languages, Dante, she yelled hysterically. None of them are bullet. Time to learn a 6th, he said, shoving a spare pistol into her hand. Safety is off. Point and squeeze. Stay behind me. They crawled out of the wreckage into the chaos of a midday ambush. Asphalt scraped against steel, creating a deafening screech that drowned out Sienna's own scream. The SUV had flipped twice before coming to a violent halt against a concrete median on the West Side Highway. Smoke, thick and acrid, instantly filled the cabin. Move, Dante grunted. He was already unbuckling his seatbelt, despite being suspended upside down. Blood dripped from a gash on his temple, defying gravity to pool on the roof lining. Sienna fumbled with the latch, her fingers numb. The world was a disorienting mess of shattered glass and deployed airbags. Outside, the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of suppressed gunfire chewed through the armored chassis of the vehicle. I can't. It's stuck, Sienna cried, panic rising in her throat like bile. Dante didn't hesitate. He braced his legs against the dashboard, shattered the buckle mechanism with the butt of his pistol, and grabbed her by the waist as she fell. He dragged her out through the broken window, shielding her body with his own as bullets sparked against the pavement inches from their heads. Run, he commanded, shoving her toward the gap in the concrete divider. Don't look back, just run. Sienna scrambled over the barrier, her boots slipping on oil and debris. They were exposed. The highway was chaos, cars swerving, horns blaring, people screaming. The attackers were professional. 3 men in tactical gear moving with military precision from a black van that had boxed them in. Dante fired back, 2 controlled shots. One attacker dropped, but Dante stumbled, his left leg buckling. You're hurt, Sienna gasped, grabbing his arm to steady him. Just a scratch, Dante lied through gritted teeth. A jagged piece of metal from the door had sliced his thigh. He was losing blood fast. We need to get off the street, the subway. 14th Street station is 2 blocks down. They moved like fugitives, weaving through the gridlocked traffic. Sienna kept her head down, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She wasn't a soldier. She was a linguist who spent her nights watching foreign films and eating microwave popcorn. Yet as the adrenaline flooded her system, her senses sharpened. She heard them before she saw them. The attackers were shouting orders to each other over the din of traffic. It wasn't English. It wasn't Russian. It wasn't Italian. Maisas, prit aeste plagosor. Sienna's mind, usually a library of organized syntax, instantly catalogued the sound. Gaeg Albanian. A specific northern dialect, harsh and guttural. Their flanking left, Sienna screamed at Dante, yanking him toward a narrow alleyway between a bodega and a dry cleaner. They know you're wounded. Dante didn't question her. He pivoted, raising his weapon toward the left corner of the alley entrance, just as a shadow emerged. He fired. The shadow crumpled. "How did you know?" Dante rasped, leaning heavily against the brick wall of the alley. His face was grey, sweat beading on his forehead. "They shouted it," Sienna whispered, pressing herself against the damp bricks. "Albanian. Northern region. They said, 'Left side, wait, he is wounded.' Who are you fighting, Dante?" "The whole United Nations." Dante checked the magazine of his gun. Empty. He reloaded with a spare clip from his jacket, his hands shaking slightly. The Albanians are supposed to be neutral. They run the gambling rings in Queens. We have a truce. "Well, the truce is over," Sienna said grimly, "and they know exactly where we are." They navigated the labyrinth of back alleys, moving deeper into the meat-packing district. The trendy neighborhood, usually filled with tourists and fashionistas, felt like a hunting ground. Dante was fading. The blood loss was making him sluggish. "I have a safe house," Dante murmured, his eyes losing focus, near the High Line, aloft, keypad, 9247. "We're not going to make it if you pass out," Sienna hissed. She saw a delivery truck idling near a loading dock. A flower delivery van. The driver was nowhere to be seen. "Get in," she ordered, shoving Dante towards the passenger side. "I don't steal cars," Dante muttered, though he climbed in. "I do," Sienna said. She jumped into the driver's seat. It wasn't stealing. The keys were in the ignition. She threw the van into reverse, tires squealing, and sped out of the alley just as two more men burst onto the street behind them. She drove like a maniac, cutting through red lights and weaving between taxis. She didn't stop until they reached the address Dante had given her, a nondescript industrial building with a rusted steel door. Inside, the loft was stark, cold and dusty. It looked like nobody had been there in years. Sienna helped Dante onto a leather sofa, the only piece of furniture in the room. "First aid kit," Dante pointed to a metal cabinet in the kitchenette. Sienna found it. It wasn't a standard CVS kit. It was a field trauma pack. Gauze, tourniquets, clotting agents, and a stapler. "You have to do it," Dante said, ripping his pant leg open to reveal the gash. It was deep, ugly, and still bleeding sluggishly. "I can't reach the angle." Sienna stared at the wound. She felt nauseous. "I deliver food, Dante. I don't sew people back together." "You speak 5 languages, Sienna," Dante said, his voice straining with pain. "Think of this as decoding a sentence. The skin is the syntax. You just need to close the loop." She took a deep breath, her hands trembling. She poured antiseptic over the wound. Dante hissed, his hand gripping the armrest so hard the leather creaked. "Talk to me," Sienna said, her voice shaking as she threaded the needle. "Distract me. Tell me why the Albanians want you dead." Dante stared at the ceiling, sweat dripping down his neck. "They don't. That's the thing. The Albanian boss, Luan, is a businessman. He doesn't do hits in daylight. It's bad for profit. This was personal." "Personal?" Sienna pushed the needle through skin. Dante flinched but didn't cry out. "Someone paid them," Dante gritted out. "Someone with deep pockets and inside information. They knew our route. They knew we were coming back from Chinatown. Only 3 people knew that route. Renzo," Sienna counted. "You and Carlo," Dante finished. Sienna paused. "Who is Carlo?" "My uncle," Dante said quietly. "The man who raised me after my father was killed." He's the consigliere of the family. Family drama, Sienna muttered, tying off the stitch, and I thought my Thanksgiving dinners were bad. She finished the job. It wasn't pretty, but the bleeding had stopped. She bandaged him up and sat back on her heels, wiping blood from her hands with a wet wipe. Dante looked at her. His eyes were dark, intense, and filled with a strange mix of gratitude and suspicion. "You handled yourself well out there," he said. "I stole a flower van," Sienna retorted, a hysterical laugh bubbling up. "I'm a criminal now." "You're alive," Dante corrected. He reached out, his hand covering hers. His palm was calloused, hot against her cold skin. "And you saved me. Again." The air in the loft grew heavy. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a raw, exposed intimacy. Sienna looked at Dante, really looked at him. He wasn't just a suit and a gun. He was a man who carried the weight of an empire on his shoulders, a man surrounded by wolves who had just found the one person who could hear the wolves coming. "Why do you do it?" Sienna asked softly. "This life?" "I didn't choose it," Dante said, his thumb brushing her wrist. "I was born into it. It's a language I've spoken since I was a child. Violence, power, leverage. It's the only tongue I know." "You know others," Sienna said. "I saw you with Master Chen. You understood respect. You understood honor." Dante's gaze dropped to her lips. "Maybe I'm learning new words." He leaned in. Sienna didn't pull away. She was terrified, exhausted, and covered in grime. But the magnetic pull of him was undeniable. His phone buzzed, shattering the moment. Dante pulled away, his expression hardening instantly. He checked the screen. "It's Carlo," he said, his voice turning to ice, "asking if we're okay." "He doesn't know we're alive?" Sienna asked. "Not yet." Dante stood up, testing his leg. He winced but stayed upright. "And we're going to keep it that way until tonight." "What's tonight?" "The Metropolitan Opera Gala," Dante said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Carlo will be there. Luan, the Albanian boss, will be there. All the families will be there to show face. And us? We're going to crash the party," Dante said. "I need you to listen, Sienna, not to what they say to me. I need you to listen to what they whisper to each other in the corners." "Can you do that?" Sienna stood up, smoothing down her ruined sweater. She thought about her student loans. She thought about the thrill of the chase. She thought about the way Dante had looked at her when she spoke Albanian. "I'll need a dress," she said. The Metropolitan Opera House was a cathedral of gold leaf and red velvet, buzzing with the elite of New York City. Senators rubbed shoulders with tech billionaires, and nestled among them were the wolves, the heads of the 5 families, dressed in tuxedos that cost more than most people's cars. Sienna stepped out of the limousine, and the air shifted. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk, backless and severe, that draped over her frame like liquid water. Her hair was swept up, revealing the delicate line of her neck. She wore diamonds, borrowed from Dante's private vault, that glittered under the flashbulbs of the paparazzi. Dante stood beside her, looking devastating in a black tuxedo. He offered her his arm. He wasn't limping. He had wrapped his leg tight and taken enough painkillers to numb a horse, masking the injury completely. To the world, he was the untouchable don of the Valenti family. "Smile," Dante murmured as they ascended the stairs. "You're the mysterious girlfriend. You're vapid, you're beautiful, and you don't understand a word of business." "I hate being vapid," Sienna whispered back, smiling radiantly for the cameras. "It's camouflage," Dante said. "Let them underestimate you. It makes their tongues loose." Inside, the gala was in full swing. Champagne flowed. A soprano was singing Puccini on stage, her voice soaring over the crowd. They moved through the room. Dante was greeted with reverence and fear. He introduced Sienna simply as Sienna, offering no surname, no explanation. Sienna played the part. She giggled, she drank champagne. She looked at the art with wide, empty eyes. Her ears were tuned like radar dishes. She heard a Japanese businessman complaining about port taxes near the bar. She heard a French diplomat discussing a mistress in Lyon near the balcony. And then she saw him. Carlo Valenti was holding court near a private alcove. He was an older man, distinguished, with silver hair and a grandfatherly smile. He was laughing with a man Sienna recognized from Dante's dossier, Luan, the Albanian. Dante steered them towards the pair. "Uncle," Dante said smoothly. Carlo froze. For a split second, the grandfatherly mask slipped, revealing pure, unadulterated shock. He recovered instantly, but Sienna saw it. "Dante," Carlo boomed, embracing him. "My boy, I heard terrible rumors. A car accident. I have been calling you for hours." "Just a fender bender," Dante said, his eyes boring into Carlo's. "My phone was smashed. We're fine. Better than fine." He turned to Luan. "Luan, good to see you." Luan, a man with a face like a clenched fist, nodded slowly. "Valenti, you look healthy." "Sienna," Dante said, "this is my Uncle Carlo and his associate, Mr. Luan." Sienna extended a gloved hand. "So nice to meet you," she chirped. Carlo dismissed her with a glance. To him, she was just an ornament. He turned back to Luan and spoke in a low murmur, switching languages. He assumed Dante couldn't understand. He was right. He assumed the girl couldn't understand. He was dead wrong. He spoke in Arborish, an old Italo-Albanian dialect found in southern Italy. It was rare, a mix of archaic Italian and Albanian structure. "The boy has 9 lives," Carlo muttered to Luan. "The job was sloppy. You said no survivors." Luan replied in the same dialect, sipping his drink. "My men were professionals. He got lucky, or he had help." "Who is the girl?" "A nobody," Carlo scoffed. "Some waitress he picked up. Focus, Luan. Tonight after the opera, he goes to the warehouse in Brooklyn. Finish it there. No mistakes." Sienna kept her smile plastered on her face, though her blood ran cold. She squeezed Dante's arm. 3 short taps. Their signal. "Get me out of here." "Darling," Sienna said, her voice breathy. "I'm feeling a bit faint." "The champagne." "Of course," Dante said immediately. "Gentlemen, excuse us." They walked away, moving towards the terrace. As soon as they were out of earshot, Dante's demeanor changed. "What did they say?" he demanded, his voice low. "It's Carlo," Sienna whispered, leaning against the stone railing of the balcony, looking out at the city. "He ordered the hit. He's angry you survived. He told Luan to try again tonight at the Brooklyn warehouse. He called me a nobody." Dante stared out at the skyline. His face was a mask of stone, but his eyes were burning with a cold, terrifying fury. Betrayal by an enemy was expected. Betrayal by blood was a mortal wound. "He raised me," Dante said softly, "after my father died. Carlo was the one who taught me to tie my tie. He taught me to shoot. He's selling you out, Dante," Sienna said gently. "Maybe he wants the throne." "He doesn't want the throne," Dante said, realizing the truth. "He wants the peace. He thinks I'm too aggressive. He wants to sell the territory to the Russians and the Albanians and retire to a villa in Capri." He turned to Sienna. "You're sure? About the Brooklyn warehouse?" He said it explicitly. "Finish it there." Dante nodded. He pulled out his burner phone. "Change of plans," he said into the phone. "We're not going to Brooklyn. Send the team to Carlo's estate in Staten Island and bring the car around. We're leaving." "Where are we going?" Sienna asked. "To give my uncle a retirement party he won't forget," Dante said. But before they could move, a shadow fell over them. It was Luan, and he wasn't alone. 2 of his guards blocked the terrace doors. "Leaving so soon?" Luan asked. His English thick and heavy. "The opera hasn't even finished the first act." Dante stepped in front of Sienna. "I've seen this show before, Luan. The hero dies in the end. I don't like it." "This time," Luan said, pulling a suppressed pistol from his jacket, "the hero dies in the intermission." The terrace was secluded. The music from inside masked the sound of the slide wrecking. "Wait!" Sienna stepped out from behind Dante. Luan blinked. Back, girl." Sienna looked Luan dead in the eye. She didn't speak English. She didn't speak Italian. She spoke Geg, the dialect of Luan's home village in the mountains of Albania. She had recognized his accent earlier. "You are a man of honor, Luan of the Kelmendi tribe," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "Since when do men of the mountains take orders from a traitor who betrays his own blood?" Luan froze. The gun wavered. The sound of his mother tongue, spoken with the specific accent of his region by an American woman in a silk dress, was so jarring it short-circuited his intent. "You speak the tongue of the eagles?" Luan asked, stunned. "I know that Carlo promised you the docks," Sienna continued, gambling everything on a hunch she'd pieced together from the files Dante had let her read. "But Carlo owns nothing. The docks belong to Dante. Carlo is a beggar selling you a house he doesn't own. When Dante dies, the Russians will take the city, not you. You know how Volkov feels about Albanians." Luan hesitated. He looked at Dante, then back at Sienna. The logic was sound. The Russians hated the Albanians. If Dante fell, Volkov would consume everything. "She speaks truth," Dante said, understanding the tone if not the words. "Carlo is using you as a blunt instrument. Join me, and you get the gambling rings in Queens, tax-free, permanently." Sienna translated quickly. Luan lowered the gun. He looked at his men. Then he looked at Dante. "Carlo is inside," Luan said in English. "He is drinking scotch and waiting for a phone call, saying you are dead." "Let's go give him the bad news," Dante said. Luan holstered his weapon. "After you, Don Valenti." Sienna let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for an hour. Her knees shook. Dante wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. He kissed her temple, hard, possessive, and full of adrenaline. "You," he whispered into her hair, "are the most dangerous weapon I own." "I told you," Sienna whispered back, trembling. "I'm expensive." "Name your price," Dante said. "Let's survive the night," Sienna replied. "Then we can talk about my raise." Together, flanked by the Albanian hitmen who had been sent to kill them, Dante and Sienna walked back into the gala. They weren't fugitives anymore. They were the hunters, and Carlo Valenti had no idea that his translator problem had just become his executioner. Puccini's Tosca reached its crescendo inside the auditorium, the soprano's voice climbing toward a heartbreaking high C that vibrated against the crystal chandeliers. Outside the main hall, in the velvet-draped VIP lounge of the Lincoln Center, a different kind of tragedy was being staged. Carlo Valenti stood by the bar, swirling a glass of 25-year-old Macallan. He looked every inch the grieving uncle, though his eyes were bright with triumph. Around him, the other heads of the 5 families, men like Salvatore, the butcher Rossi, and the calm, terrifying figure of Elias Thorne, head of the Irish mob, offered their condolences in hushed tones. Rumors of Dante's unfortunate accident on the highway had already begun to circulate, planted by Carlo's own men. "A tragedy," Carlo murmured, bowing his head. "My brother's son, so young, so reckless." "He was a strong leader," Elias Thorne said, lighting a cigar despite the venue's strict no-smoking policy. "But perhaps too modern. He lacked the old-world caution." "Precisely," Carlo agreed, hiding a smirk behind his glass. "I will do my best to stabilize the family during this difficult transition." The heavy double doors swung open. Luan strode in. He was alone. His tuxedo was slightly rumpled, and there was a smear of grease on his cuff. But he looked calm. Carlo's heart leaped. He excused himself from the other dons and walked over to the Albanian hitman. "Is it done?" Carlo asked in English, loud enough for the room to hear but vague enough to be plausible deniability. Luan nodded once. "The package is handled." Carlo let out a long breath. The throne was his. The Valenti Empire, the shipping lanes, the unions, all of it. "Good." Carlo switched to the obscure Arboresh dialect again, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Burn the bodies. The girl, too. Make sure nothing remains but ash. I want no dental records. Luan stared at him, his face unreadable. He didn't answer. Did you hear me? Carlo hissed, irritation flaring. I said burn them. He heard you. A voice rang out from the doorway. But he takes orders from the Don, not the retiree. The room went deathly silent. Dante Valenti stepped into the light. He was battered. A bandage was visible just above his collar, and he walked with a slight limp that he didn't bother to hide. But the sheer force of his presence sucked the oxygen out of the room. He looked like a revenant, a ghost that had crawled out of a grave to drag his killer back down with him. Beside him stood Sienna. She looked magnificent. The adrenaline had flushed her cheeks, and her eyes were blazing. She held her head high, mimicking the posture of the queens she had read about in history books. She wasn't just a translator anymore. She was the herald of judgment. Carlo dropped his glass. It shattered on the marble floor, the amber liquid pooling like blood. Dante? Carlo stammered, his face draining of color. My boy, you're alive. The reports said... The reports were greatly exaggerated, Dante said, walking slowly into the room. The other Dons backed away, sensing the violence radiating off him. But you know that, uncle. Since you wrote them. Carlo laughed nervously, spreading his hands. Dante, you've had a concussion. You're confused. I was just telling Elias how worried I was. Dante stopped 10 feet from his uncle. He looked at Sienna. Translate, Dante ordered. Sienna stepped forward. Her voice was clear, projecting to every corner of the silent lounge. He didn't just express worry, Sienna said, pointing a steady finger at Carlo. He just gave an order in the Arboresh dialect of southern Italy. He said, burn the bodies. The girl, too. Make sure nothing remains but ash. I want no dental records. A gasp went through the room. Elias Thorne narrowed his eyes at Carlo. Salvatore Rossi placed a hand on his holster. She lies, Carlo screamed, his grandfatherly mask disintegrating into panic. She's a hired whore. She doesn't know what she's saying. I speak 5 languages fluently, Mr. Valenti, Sienna said cold, her voice slicing through his hysteria. And I understand 3 more. Your accent is from the village of Piana degli Albanesi. You use the word jar for fire, which is specific to that region. Shall I continue? Or would you like to insult my intelligence in French? Carlo looked around wildly. The other Dons were staring at him with disgust. In their world, killing a rival was business. Killing your own nephew to steal his throne was a sin. Being caught doing it was a death sentence. Luan, Carlo shouted, kill them, now. I'll double the price. Luan didn't move. He took a sip of a drink he had swiped from a passing waiter. My contract was to kill a weak leader, Luan said heavily. I see no weak leader here. I see only a traitor. Carlo realized he was alone. He lunged for the inside pocket of his tuxedo. Dante moved faster than a man with a wounded leg should be able to move. He closed the distance in 2 strides, grabbing Carlo's wrist and twisting it until a small, silver pistol clattered to the floor. Dante didn't strike him. He didn't scream. He simply held Carlo's wrist in a vice grip, looking down at the man who had raised him. You taught me that family is everything, Dante said softly. You taught me that betrayal is the only unforgivable sin. I did it for the family, Carlo wept, the fight leaving him. You were going to ruin us with your wars. I wanted peace. You wanted comfort, Dante corrected, and you bought it with my blood. He turned to the other Dons. Gentlemen, Dante said, his voice regaining its businesslike composure, my uncle is retiring, effective immediately. He will be moving to a very small, very secure facility in the Catskills where he can enjoy the nature and contemplate his choices. He will not be seen in the city again. It was a mercy. In the old days, Carlo would have been executed on the spot. But Dante was building a new world. Take him, Dante ordered his security team, who had just flooded the room. As Carlo was dragged out, sobbing and broken, the tension in the room broke. Elias Thorne stepped forward. He looked at Dante, then at Sienna. "You have a formidable second, Valenti," Thorne said, nodding at Sienna. "I didn't know you had a consigliere." "She's not a consigliere," Dante said, pulling Sienna to his side. "She's my voice." Sienna looked up at Dante. He wasn't looking at the powerful men in the room. He was looking at her, with a look of raw, unmasked admiration. "The show's over," Dante said to the room. "Enjoy the second act. We have work to do." They walked out of the Lincoln Center into the cool night air. The rain had stopped. The city was washed clean. "You didn't kill him," Sienna said quietly as they waited for the car. "No," Dante said. "Death is too easy. Obscurity, that will kill Carlo faster than a bullet." He turned to her, wincing slightly as the adrenaline faded and the pain in his leg returned. "You were perfect in there," he said. "I was terrified," Sienna admitted, leaning against him. "I thought he was going to shoot you." "He couldn't," Dante said. "You stripped him of his power before he could even draw his weapon. You took away his secrets. That's more dangerous than a gun." The car arrived, a new one, pristine black. "Where to, boss?" the driver asked. Dante looked at Sienna. "Home," he said, "the real one." 3 days later, the penthouse was quiet. The shattered glass had been replaced. The blood had been scrubbed from the carpet. The city below continued its chaotic churn, unaware of the shift in the tectonic plates of the underworld. Sienna stood in the guest room, packing her duffel bag. A contract was up. The threat was neutralized. Carlo was gone. Nikolai Volkov had fled back to Moscow after the failed bombing, and the Albanians were now firm allies. Dante Valenti was the undisputed king of New York, and Sienna was just a delivery driver who knew too much. She folded the silk dress Dante had bought her. She placed the diamonds on the dresser. She packed her worn-out jeans and her faded hoodies. Misa the cat was already in his carrier, looking disgruntled. "Going somewhere?" Sienna froze. She turned to see Dante leaning against the doorframe. He wasn't wearing a suit today. He wore a dark cashmere sweater and jeans. He looked younger, less like a monument to violence and more like a man. "The job is done," Sienna said, forcing a smile. "You're safe. The treaties are signed. You don't need a translator anymore." Dante walked into the room. He picked up the stack of cash sitting on the bed. Her payment. It was $50,000. More money than she had ever seen in one place. "You earned this," he said. "I did," she agreed. "I'm going to pay off my loans. Maybe go back to grad school. Finish my thesis on linguistic anthropology." "Sounds quiet," Dante said. "Quiet is good," Sienna said, though her voice wavered. "Quiet is safe. I'm not cut out for your world, Dante. I saw men die this week. I saw you almost die. I can't live waiting for the next bullet." Dante stood in front of her. The space between them was charged with the electricity that had been building since that first night in the rain. "You're right," Dante said. "It is dangerous. It is brutal. And I won't ask you to stay for the money." Sienna felt a pang of disappointment she hadn't expected. She wanted him to argue. She wanted him to beg. "Okay then," she whispered. She picked up her bag. "Goodbye, Dante." She walked past him. "Sienna." His voice stopped her at the door. It wasn't a command, it was a plea. She turned. "I don't need a translator anymore," Dante said, walking toward her slowly. "I can hire someone to translate words. I can hire someone to read contracts." He stopped inches from her. He reached out and took the bag from her hand, setting it on the floor. "But I can't hire someone who knows what I'm thinking before I say it," he said softly. "I can't hire someone who looks at a warlord and tells him to go to hell in his own dialect. And I can't hire someone who makes me feel human." Sienna's breath hitched. "Dante." "I've spent my whole life speaking in codes," Dante said, his dark eyes searching hers. "With you, I don't have to translate anything. You just know." He took her face in his hands. His thumbs traced her cheekbones. "Don't go back to the quiet," he whispered. "Stay in the noise with me. We'll make it our own." "As what?" Sienna asked, her heart hammering. Your employee? No, Dante said firmly. My equal. Run the empire with me. You have the mind for it. You have the steel for it. And he leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. And I think I'm falling in love with you, he murmured against her lips. Sienna closed her eyes. She thought about her lonely apartment. She thought about the cold nights delivering food to ungrateful strangers. Then she thought about the fire in Dante's eyes, the way he had protected her, the way he looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. She realized she didn't want the quiet anymore. She had tasted the storm, and she liked the rain. You're terrible at negotiating, Sienna whispered, smiling. You showed your hand too early. Is that so? Dante smirked. Yes, she said. She reached up, winding her arms around his neck. But I accept the counteroffer. Dante kissed her. It wasn't the desperate, adrenaline-fueled kiss of the gala. It was slow, deep, and full of a promise that was more binding than any blood oath. It was a kiss that sealed a partnership between the king of the city and the only woman who could speak his language. When they finally broke apart, Dante looked at the cat carrier. I guess Miso stays too, he sighed. Miso loves the heated floors. Sienna laughed. And you? Dante asked. What do you love? Sienna looked around the penthouse. It wasn't a cage anymore. It was a fortress. And she held the keys. I love the view, she said, looking at him. Dante smiled. He took her hand and led her out of the guest room, down the hall, and into the master suite. The delivery girl was gone, the queen had arrived, and the underworld would never be the same again. They had no idea what was coming. Dante Valenti had the guns, but Sienna Brooks had the words, and together they were untranslatable. And that is the story of how a simple delivery changed the fate of the New York Mafia forever. Who knew that knowing a northern Albanian dialect could save your life? If you loved the chemistry between Dante and Sienna and want to see more stories about ordinary people getting swept up in extraordinary, dangerous romances, make sure you smash that like button. What do you think? Should Sienna have taken the money and run? Or did she make the right choice staying with Dante? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss an upload. I'll see you in the next story. Stay safe and maybe learn a second language. You never know when you might need it.